it's retro week here at GMBN and GMBN Tech, so I thought I would delve in and show you something that you might not have seen before. Now, no doubt at GMBN and GMBN Tech, you'll have seen us at some point riding Nukeproof bikes. And of course, you would definitely have seen Sam Hill racing and winning on his bike, Nukeproof Mega, at the Enduro World Series races. What you might not realise though is Nukeproof isn't a new brand. They've actually been around since the mid-90s, 22 years in fact. They first started producing carbon-shelled titanium axled hubs, absolutely masterpieces they were. And then they later, in 1997, released their first bike called the Reactor. And I've got one right here. So firstly, let's take a look at this thing. They're extremely rare. You don't really see many of these around. And the guys at Nukeproof have been trying to get hold of one of these for the last 2 years, and they've just managed to build it up. Now, if I directly compare this to my Scout, which is a modern day hardtail, you'll notice it looks very, very different to this. Of course, back in the 90s, there wasn't really a genre for downhill or trail riding or cross country. You just rode a mountain bike in whatever discipline you fancied. So let's just call this a trail bike for argument's sake. You'll notice it's got V-brakes on there rather than the disc brakes that I have on my Scout. You might also notice it has 26-inch wheels rather than 27.5, and you'll also notice it's incredibly short compared to my Scout. And the final thing you're going to notice is, as well as that monstrosity of a long stem at the front there, which definitely has obscure handling compared to what we're used to today, you'll notice it's got a linkage fork instead of a telescopic fork, which we're much more used to these days. Let's have a little closer look. Now, firstly, let's take a look at the frame, which is made from oversized aluminium. Now, these days, we don't really tend to refer to bikes as oversized because they mostly are. Now, oversized was the term really heavily used in the 90s, and essentially it helped make frames lighter and stiffer. So basically, to make a lightweight aluminium frame, what you need to do is make the walls of the alloy itself quite thin. The only problem with that is then it becomes quite flexible. So to get around that, you make the tubes bigger. So you've got thinner walls and they're bigger tubes. So they're nice and stiff and strong, but they're nice and light. So this is a classic oversized frame, and it's using a quite traditional double diamond layout. Out back, you've got a 135mm, pretty standard quick release rear end on the bike, and you've got a short 420mm chainstay. Seat angle on here, you're looking at about 73 degrees, which is quite modern to be fair, but up front, it's got a 71-degree head angle. So that is pretty steep by today's standards. If you consider that my current Scout, the chainstays on that are 435. It's got a 73-degree seat angle and it's got a 65-degree head angle, much more in keeping with today's sort of trail hardtails and trail full suspension bikes. Quite a lot more aggressive. But the really cool thing about this is the Reactor fork. Now, this essentially is an integrated frame of fork. You can't fit this fork to another bike. Look at the size of the head tube on there, and you can see this linkage. Now, the reason for designing a bike like this back in the 90s was that telescopic forks weren't up to the standard of forks nowadays. So two of the things that telescopic forks did was A, they changed the angle of your bike as you compress. Of course, any fork these days does the same. And the other thing as well is the fact they had a lot of stiction. So stiction is the friction you have to overcome for the fork to work. These days, our forks are really buttery. They feel absolutely incredible. The forks on my Scout are just so supple over the small bumps. However, that wasn't the case in the 90s. So to get around that, they've got this linkage fork, which has almost zero stiction on there. And it's got a proper coil shock mounted inside the head tube there. A coil shock like you would find on the back of full suspension bikes today. We've got an externally adjustable rebound action on there. And I've got to say, the action of it still feels really, really good. It's incredibly smooth and incredibly plush, which for a bike from 1997 is a very rare thing, I can tell you that for sure. So as a telescopic fork compresses, you're effectively shortening your wheelbase. By having a linkage like this, the wheelbase isn't actually affected quite so much. In fact, it's barely anything compared to a regular telescopic fork, because of the nature of the fact the fork moves up and forward slightly. It's quite a linear action compared to some of the other linkage forks on the market, so it doesn't affect your geometry quite as much. The head angle doesn't suffer quite as much as a telescopic fork. However, the fact that it only works on this particular bike means it wasn't really something that's going to carry through to today. But I absolutely love the fact that Nukeproof made this bike. I think it looks absolutely amazing. And the quality of the workmanship on the linkages and stuff, just fantastic. Now, transmission-wise on this bike, I'm pleased to see it's got an XTR M950 transmission. So this was the first of the grey XTR, which to me, I think is the best looking of that era. This was the one I sought after. In fact, I had that rear mech on one of my bikes. In fact, I had an old Giant ATX 990, one of these. So this was 8-speed, triple on the front there, XTR grey, the unique ring orientation there. XTR front mech. Moving up to the bars, it's got the lovely STI levers, the Shimano total integration. So you've got the rapid fire shifter with the downshift with your finger and your upshift with your thumb, and a 2-finger brake loop. Absolutely beautiful design. They still look fantastic today. Also notice up front, they've got some of the early Nukeproof carbon fiber handlebars. And unlike the bars we see today using carbon fiber, you can see where you can feel the weave on the outside of the bar. Incredible looking things. I'm kind of amazed they're still in one piece, to be honest, after all these years. The stem length, as you can see, is extremely long. That's just how it was back in the 90s. We've seen this before in my other retro versus modern videos. So this is a 135mm stem using an A headset design, so it clamps onto the steerer, just like the modern stems. The bars on these, interestingly to see, so these are a 560, so that's a tiny bar. If you consider on my Scout, I'm running a 35mm stem, I'm running a full 800mm bar. Of course, the bike is a lot longer, so the cockpit length actually isn't too dissimilar to my regular Scout. It's just the wheel position and the whole stretched out look of the bike is very, very different. As for the wheels, they're Sun CR18 rims laced up on those real early bombshell hubs. Now, you probably noticed looking at the Scout that the wheels look immense on them. They're so much bigger and burlier than these quite svelte wheels you see on the Reactor. But in reality, they're probably not that much heavier because they're made from extremely lightweight and very stiff carbon fiber. They're FSA wheels on there. And I'm running the tyres tubeless, whereas on the earlier Reactor bike, that would be running inner tubes. Now, the bombshell hubs look amazing. They've got the carbon shell on the middle. It's almost raw carbon looking at it. And they've got the titanium axle, so they're extremely light. Now, these hubs were so sought after back in the day, and I'm really pleased to actually see a set in the flesh because I haven't seen these ever in the flesh. Really, really cool to see them. Now, although they're not originals, I'm really pleased to see the reissues or the remakes of the Panaracer Smoke and Dark tyres. Now, these are iconic for back in the day, and they're front and rear specific tyres. So the Smoke out back has got a heavy open paddle design with quite abrupt shoulders on. In fact, they look quite modern, actually, by all accounts. That's designed to give you a propulsion to get you forwards. And then for the control, they've kind of got a paddle design, but it's in a dart basis, so it's the opposite way around. On the front tyre, they're designed to help you cut through the stuff to help you aid your cornering. And then on top of that XTR seat post out back, a classic flight titanium saddle. Now, if you rode in the 90s, almost certainly you either had one of those or you desired to have one. That was, and probably still is by all accounts, one of the most comfortable saddles ever made for a mountain bike, despite how minimal it looks. The titanium rails on it and the unique sort of profile of the body, once you've ridden them for a while, they would just sort of give and have a really lovely sag. Fantastic for many hours in the saddle, which is why you saw them on so many pros bikes. And then the brakes, now this is where it's really different. Now, XTR V brakes are absolutely fantastic and some of the best rim cable operated brakes money could buy. Immense amounts of leverage, they've got lovely shoes on them. They use a parallelogram design and you can change those brake pads in the shoes nice and easy. But really, despite how good they were and how much power they gave, you still were subject to the conditions changing things. When rims got wet and muddy, your brakes didn't work as well. The brake pads would wear out very fast in muddy conditions, and they're just not as consistent as the brakes we have today. The brakes on the Scout, phenomenal, incredibly powerful, incredibly predictable in any situation, and the pads last far longer by comparison to the earlier bikes. I absolutely love the old stuff, but there's no doubt that what we have today is miles better. It's not even comparable. The stuff that I can do on the Scout is stuff that you simply couldn't even fathom doing on the old Reactor. But at the same time, we kind of have these old bikes with this old tech to thank for where we are today. Personally, I'll take a new bike any day of the week because the Scout is light enough that I can ride it all day long, like a cross-country bike, but it's aggressive enough that when the going gets rowdy, it's really good fun as well. But I just love looking at this old stuff. What do you think of it? I'd love to know what you think of this crazy looking bike, especially that linkage fork with the coil shock and head tube. I'm taking a guess that a lot of you might not have seen one of these before. I'd not seen this bike until today, in fact. Let us know in the comments. Well, there you go. That is the 1997 Nukeproof Reactor. A very cool bike. I'm sure even if it's not to your preference, you'll appreciate the fact that the amount of work that went into designing this bike. I think it's really cool. Let us know what you think of it in the comments below. And if you've got a favourite retro bike, let's hear what it is. Call it out in those comments below and we will feature it on the next GMBN Tech show. Don't forget to keep an eye out for all the retro content across GMBN and GMBN Tech over the week. And of course, if you want to see another retro-based video, click down here for my modern versus retro with the XTR, looking at the original M900 all the way through to the M9100 on a couple of very cool bikes. As always, don't forget to give us a huge thumbs up here at GMBN Tech and click that subscribe button. Cheers, guys.